My ex-wife Renee set up the date, in her own words, to prove a point, which is not, historically, a phrase that has ever preceded a good idea in the 10 years I knew her. We'd been divorced a year, stayed friendly in the specific, careful way people manage when the split was mutual, and mostly amicable. We'd grown apart more than we'd grown angry at each other, the specific quiet erosion of a marriage that ends not with betrayal, but with two people slowly wanting different shapes of life. She'd kept the house in the divorce. I'd kept the pickup truck and considerably more free time than I knew what to do with. We still had dinner occasionally, still checked in when one of our parents had a health scare, had somehow managed the rare, genuinely amicable divorce that made people at parties visibly relax when we explained the arrangement. Somewhere around month 11 of that friendliness, she got tired of listening to me turn down every person she suggested. "You're impossible," she told me over coffee, the week before the date in question. "You rejected my coworker for liking the wrong kind of hiking boots. You rejected my cousin's friend because her laugh was, and I'm quoting you directly, too loud for a first date. I'm starting to think you're not actually looking for anyone, Calder. I think you're looking for reasons to stay single." That's an aggressive read of my hiking boot opinions. I bet you can't get through one full date without finding some new, ridiculous reason to write someone off. She said it with the specific competitive glint I remembered from a decade of marriage. The one that meant she'd already decided how this was going to go. "I've got someone. A friend from work. Smart, funny, entirely out of your usual pattern. I bet you can't make it through dinner without disqualifying her over something absurd. I'm Calder Sutton, 35. I work construction management, spend my days translating blueprints into buildings, and my evenings, apparently, disqualifying reasonable women over hiking boots." I agreed to the date mostly to prove Renee wrong, which I recognize, in retrospect, is not the healthiest reason to agree to anything. What Renee left out, deliberately or not, was that her friend Mara Ashby is deaf. I found this out approximately 4 minutes into the date, standing awkwardly at the entrance of a quiet Italian restaurant. Renee had picked specifically, I'd later learn, for its low ambient noise, when the woman waiting for me signed something I couldn't parse, then, catching my blank expression, spoke instead, her voice clear and only slightly different in cadence than what I was used to. "You're Calder," she said, not really a question. "Renee's ex. I was told you'd look confused. I didn't expect it to start this fast. I'm sorry I didn't realize." "That I'm deaf?" She said it plainly, no edge to it, the specific matter-of-fact delivery of someone who'd clearly had this exact conversation opener more times than she cared to count. "Renee didn't tell you?" She left that detail out, along with several others apparently, given the whole proving a point framing of this evening. Mara's expression shifted into something wry. "So this is a bet. That's new information for me too then. Wonderful. We're both walking into this slightly deceived. I want to be honest about my exact internal state in that moment, because it matters for the rest of this story. I panicked, briefly and completely, not because of anything about Mara herself, but because I had absolutely no idea how to behave, what the right etiquette was, whether I was about to say or do something clumsy and unintentionally hurtful in the next 4 seconds. I'd never dated a deaf person. I didn't know a single sign beyond the alphabet. I'd half remembered from a childhood Girl Scout badge my sister had once shown me. I stood there entirely out of my depth, and did the one thing that felt marginally better than freezing completely. "Can we start over?" I asked. "Properly. Without the bet, without me looking like an idiot in the doorway." Mara studied me for a moment, something assessing in her expression, the specific evaluation of someone who'd learned to read a person's intentions quickly because the alternative, waiting for words that might never come clearly, wasn't always reliable. "Sure," she said, starting over. "Hi, I'm Mara. I read lips reasonably well. I can talk, obviously, and I sign when I'm tired of doing both, which happens more on bad days than good ones. If you say something I miss, just repeat it, don't shout it, and please, for the love of God, don't grab my arm to get my attention like I'm a startled horse. People do that constantly and it's deeply unsettling every single time." Noted. No grabbing, no shouting. "You're already outperforming my last 3 setups, and we haven't even sat down yet. That's a low bar or a genuine compliment, and I can't quite tell which. Both, probably. My standards have taken a beating recently. There was a man last spring who spent the entire dinner speaking directly to my interpreter instead of me, like I was a translation problem to be routed around, instead of the actual person sitting across from him. That sounds excruciating. It was. He also ordered for me without asking, which felt like an entirely separate category of presumption. She gestured toward the restaurant entrance. "Shall we?" I already told the hostess we'd need the quiet corner table. I called ahead. I do that now, after enough dates in restaurants where I couldn't read a single lip across the noise of a Friday night crowd. The hostess seated us in a small alcove near the back, considerably quieter than the main dining room, and I found myself grateful for a level of forethought I wouldn't have thought to arrange myself. Here's what you need to know about Mara Ashby before anything else happens. She's a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, sharp in the specific way that makes meetings move faster whenever she's in the room, according to Renee, who'd worked with her for 2 years before this entire situation began. She lost most of her hearing to meningitis at age 6, grew up straddling the hearing and deaf worlds, in the specific exhausting way a lot of deaf kids raised by hearing families do, and had, by her own account, developed a finely tuned radar for people who treated her deafness as either a tragedy to be pitied or a puzzle to be solved, instead of just an ordinary fact about her life, the way someone else might mention they're left-handed or allergic to shellfish. We sat down to dinner, and I spent the first 20 minutes being more careful than I'd ever been on a first date, hyper-aware of my own mouth movements, terrified of the specific quiet catastrophe of accidentally being condescending without realizing it. Mara noticed, because of course she did. "You can relax," she said, about halfway through the appetizer. "You've got the exact energy of a man defusing a bomb. I promise I'm not going to break if you say the wrong thing. I don't want to say the wrong thing, though. I've genuinely never done this before, and I don't want my first attempt to be the thing you tell your friends about later as the worst example." That's actually refreshing, believe it or not. Most people either overcompensate with performative sensitivity, treating me like I'm made of glass, or they get weird and avoidant, like deafness is contagious if we make eye contact too long. You're doing neither. You're just nervous in a normal first date way, which happens to also involve some logistics most of your dates probably haven't required. Is there a manual? I feel like I should have read a manual. There's no manual. There's just me telling you what works and what doesn't, and you, presumably, listening. She smiled at that, small and genuine. Also, for the record, since we're doing full honesty tonight, don't feel sorry for me. I can see it starting to happen in your face sometimes, that specific soft, sad look people get when they remember I'm deaf mid-conversation, like they've just recalled a tragedy. I don't need that. I've had a full, good life. I don't need you grieving it on my behalf over appetizers. I sat with that for a moment, genuinely startled by how directly she'd named something I hadn't even fully recognized I was doing. "That's fair," I said. "I'll work on it." "Good. I'd rather you work on it badly and keep trying than perform perfect sensitivity you don't actually feel. I can tell the difference, for what it's worth." "How can you tell?" "Practice. 29 years of practice specifically. You develop a pretty reliable radar for the difference between someone actually curious about you and someone performing curiosity because they think it makes them a good person. You're doing the first one, mostly. Occasionally you slip into the second one for a sentence or two, but you catch yourself faster than most people manage." I'll take the compliment, backhanded as it might be. She laughed at that, an easy, unguarded sound, and something in the tension of the evening finally settled into something closer to normal first date nerves, instead of the specific, careful anxiety I'd been carrying since the doorway. We talked for the better part of 2 hours, well past when the appetizers had cleared, covering the ordinary territory of a first date. Her work debugging systems most people would never understand. My work turning blueprints into buildings that would hopefully still be standing in 50 years, the specific shared experience of divorce we'd both apparently survived. Hers ending 3 years earlier, for reasons she described only briefly, a college boyfriend who'd never quite gotten comfortable with her deafness despite 4 years of practice. "He used to apologize to other people on my behalf," she said, when the subject came up. "Like my deafness was some social inconvenience he had to smooth over for everyone else's comfort. It took me longer than it should have to realize that wasn't love. That was just management. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be different. That's considerably more useful to me than sympathy for an ex-boyfriend from 6 years ago." Dinner went better than either of us had any right to expect, given the bet hanging unspoken over the whole evening. Mara taught me my first real sign that night, unprompted, over dessert, a small specific gesture that meant funny, her fingers brushing her nose in a quick, easy motion. "You'll need that one," she said, "given how often you're about to accidentally say something that qualifies." I practiced it clumsily 3 times, until she nodded satisfied. "There, your first actual sign. Try not to lose it." I didn't lose it. I found myself using it constantly over the following weeks, as what started as one slightly deceptive dinner turned into a second date, then a third, then something that had clearly stopped being about Renee's bet entirely, and started being about the specific, sharp, funny woman across the table who'd stopped correcting my clumsy signing attempts and started, instead, teaching me new ones every time we saw each other. I want to be honest about the learning curve. Because it wasn't effortless or cinematic, it was slow, occasionally embarrassing, genuinely difficult in the specific way. Learning any new language is difficult for an adult brain that spent 35 years getting comfortable with just the one. I signed up for a beginner ASL class at the community center, sat in a room full of strangers fumbling through the same basic vocabulary, a mixed group of hearing parents of deaf kids, a few codas brushing up on rusty childhood fluency, one other guy roughly my age who admitted, during a break, that he'd started the class for almost the exact same reason I had. Girlfriend's sister is deaf, he told me, over bad vending machine coffee. Figured I should be able to actually talk to her at Thanksgiving, instead of just nodding along to whatever gets relayed to me secondhand. Similar situation, more or less, except mine started as a bet, which I'm still working through the ethics of a bet. Long story, ongoing story actually. I'm hoping it turns into a good one. I went home most nights after class and practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, like a man rehearsing lines for a play only one person would ever see performed, running through the same 20 signs until my hands ached in unfamiliar ways, texting Mara photos of my clumsy attempts at fingerspelling for her to critique. "Your R is atrocious," she texted back once, along with a video of the correct hand shape. "You're doing the sign for chicken instead. I'd let you keep doing it if it weren't going to cause serious confusion eventually." In my defense, I've been practicing for exactly 9 days. I'm not blaming you. I'm mocking you affectionately. There's a difference, and I need you to learn to tell them apart, because I do a lot of the second one. "You don't have to do this, you know," Mara told me, a few weeks in, watching me struggle through a particularly clumsy attempt at describing my day. "I read lips fine, I can talk. You could just do this the easy way, and let me carry the communication load, the way basically everyone else in my life does. I don't want to make you carry the whole load. That seems like a bad long-term plan for a relationship if this turns into one." "Is it turning into one?" "I'd like it to." "If you're amenable." "I'm amenable," she said, and signed something quick I hadn't learned yet, catching my confused expression and laughing. "That one means good. You'll get there." Renee, for her part, found out the bet had backfired spectacularly about 3 weeks in, when I mentioned, over another coffee, that Mara and I were seeing each other seriously. "Wait," Renee said, setting down her cup with theatrical slowness. "You're actually dating her? This wasn't supposed to be a real thing, Calder. This was supposed to prove you'd find some absurd reason to reject her within a week." "I know. I did wonder, honestly, whether that was the point of the whole setup, proving I was as impossible as you kept saying. I didn't actually think it would work out. I mean, I hoped, in a vague way, that maybe you'd have a nice time. I didn't think you'd fall for her." Renee looked genuinely startled, processing something in real time. This is either the best or worst thing I've ever accidentally engineered. I genuinely can't tell which yet. Around that same time, Mara invited me to a small gathering of her friends, most of them deaf. A low-key game night at her apartment that felt like a significant threshold to cross. The first time I'd be navigating a room where I was, for once, the outsider to the primary language being spoken. "You don't have to come if you're not ready," she told me, giving me an easy out I chose not to take. "I want to come. I want to meet the people who matter to you." The evening was humbling in the specific, useful way new experiences sometimes are. Conversations moving at a speed I couldn't fully keep pace with yet. Jokes landing half a beat before I caught the punchline. A room full of people who'd clearly built an entire rich social world that had never once required my language to function. Mara's friend Priya, sharp-witted and immediately likable, caught me looking slightly lost during a particularly fast exchange and slowed down deliberately, including me without making a production of it. "You'll get faster," she signed, patient. "Everyone does, eventually, if they actually stick around long enough to practice instead of just showing up once for the experience." "I'm planning on sticking around." "Good. Mara doesn't bring just anyone to game night. Consider yourself vetted." I left that evening feeling like I'd been handed a small, significant piece of trust. The specific weight of being welcomed into a world that had every right to be protective of its boundaries, after years of well-meaning but ultimately exhausting hearing visitors. I should have been more careful about how that conversation might travel, because it did. 3 days later, in a way I hadn't anticipated, Mara called me on a Thursday evening, voice tighter than I'd heard it before, the specific controlled tension of someone working hard to stay, measured about something that clearly wasn't measured at all underneath. Renee told a mutual friend about the bet, she said, without preamble. The whole thing. That she dared you to get through dinner without finding some reason to write me off. That whole premise, apparently, spelled out to someone who then, helpfully, relayed it back to me over lunch today. Mara, I need you to understand how that landed, Calder. I spent my entire childhood being other people's lesson. The kid the school paraded around to teach other students about inclusion. The girlfriend my college boyfriend's parents introduced to their book club, like a live demonstration of their own open-mindedness. And now I find out the very first date with you started as a bet about whether you could tolerate someone like me for one full dinner. I don't know how to hear that and not feel like I'm right back there again. A point being proven instead of a person being chosen. That's not what this became. Whatever it started as, that's not what it is now. Maybe. Or maybe I've just spent 3 weeks convincing myself of that, because the alternative is too exhausting to sit with. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, the first real crack in her usual composure since we'd met. I need some space, Calder. I need to actually figure out whether I've been building something real, or whether I've just been the proof of concept in someone else's argument about your pickiness. Can I ask, what would help? I don't want to make this worse by pushing when you need distance. I don't know yet what would help. That's honestly the most frustrating part. I just know I need to not be on the phone with you right this second, feeling all of this at once. The call ended there, and I spent the following week in a state of genuine dread, unsure whether the relationship could survive its own uncomfortable origin story, unsure whether anything I said would land as reassurance, or just more evidence of exactly the kind of performative reassurance she'd specifically warned me about on our first date. I called Renee that same night, angrier than I'd been with her in the entire year since our divorce. Why would you tell people it was a bet? I said, the second she picked up. Why would you frame it that way to anyone, knowing what that framing would do if it got back to her? I didn't think it would get back to her, Calder. I was venting to a friend, not making an announcement. I didn't think it through properly, and I'm sorry, genuinely, but yelling at me about it doesn't do it. No, but it might help me understand why you needed to frame the start of my relationship as some kind of competition in the first place. Renee was quiet for a moment. Because I was frustrated with you, and turning it into a bet felt lower stakes than admitting I was genuinely worried you'd spend the rest of your life alone, out of sheer stubbornness. I didn't think about how it would sound from Mara's side of things. That's on me, completely on me. I'll apologize to her directly, if she'll let me. I don't know if that's my call to arrange. This is between the two of you now, whether you like that or not. I know. I'm not asking you to fix it for me. I'm just telling you I understand the damage, even if understanding it a week late doesn't undo any of it. There was a long pause on the line, both of us sitting with the specific discomfort of a friendship that had survived a divorce, now being tested by something neither of us had anticipated. For what it's worth, Renee said eventually, quieter now, I like her. Genuinely. I've liked her since I started working with her 2 years ago, long before any of this. I wanted you two to meet because some small, hopeful part of me actually thought you'd be good together, underneath all the joking and the bet framing. I just handled the delivery badly, spectacularly badly apparently. You did, but I believe you about the underlying hope for what it's worth. Thank you, I mean that. I'll fix what I can fix on my end. I didn't call Mara, not immediately. I sat with it instead, trying to understand what she actually needed from me instead of what would make me feel better fastest. When I finally did reach out, 4 days later, it wasn't with an argument or a defense. It was with a request. I don't want to convince you of anything over the phone. I signed badly, in a video message I recorded and sent instead of calling, fumbling through the vocabulary I'd built over 3 weeks of clumsy practice. I want to show up in person and let you decide for yourself whether this feels real. No pressure to answer right away. I'll be at the coffee shop near your office Saturday morning, same time you usually go. I'll be there whether you show up or not. I don't know, to this day, whether the effort of signing it badly, instead of just speaking it fluently over the phone, mattered as much as I hoped it would. I know I meant every clumsy, poorly formed sentence of it. She showed up Saturday morning, 10 minutes late, sliding into the seat across from me without much preamble. That video was genuinely terrible signing, she said. Your grammar was backwards in at least 3 places. I know. I practiced it for 2 hours and it still came out wrong. I noticed the effort though, for what it's worth. Nobody's ever bothered being bad at something for me before. Usually people either commit fully or not at all. The badly trying middle ground is new. I'd rather be badly trying than not trying at all. I meant that video. Whatever this started as, it's not that anymore, not for me. I don't care what Renee's original bet was. I care about the person who taught me the sign for funny, over dessert on a date I almost ruined by panicking in a doorway. Mara was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table between us. I talked to Renee, she said eventually. Properly, not secondhand through a mutual friend. She actually cried a little, explaining that she never meant for it to hurt me, that the bet was about you, about your pickiness, and I just happened to be the person standing in the crossfire of a decade-old marital dynamic that had nothing to do with me. Do you believe her? I believe she didn't intend it maliciously. I believe it still landed exactly the way it landed, regardless of intention. Those two things can both be true. She looked up at me, something steadier in her expression now. I believe you too, for what it's worth, about this not being about the bet anymore. I've spent the last week trying to find the flaw in that belief, and I haven't found one yet. Does that mean we're okay? It means I'm willing to keep finding out, cautiously. With slightly better grammar from you going forward, ideally. I laughed, some of the week's tension finally breaking. I'll keep practicing. You'd better. I'm not settling for backward sentence structure forever. We sat in that coffee shop for another hour, the careful distance of the previous week, gradually easing into something more familiar, both of us relearning the specific comfort we'd built over the first few weeks before the bet's ugly resurfacing had briefly threatened to undo it. When we finally stood to leave, she walked me to my truck instead of heading straight to her own car, lingering in the parking lot in a way neither of us seemed eager to end. Thank you, she said, for showing up instead of just calling, for the terrible video, for all of it, honestly. Thank you for giving me a second chance to prove the terrible grammar was worth something. She looked up at me, something softer than her usual wry composure settling over her features. Can I tell you something? I almost didn't come this morning. I sat in my car for 10 minutes deciding whether showing up was worth the risk of getting hurt again. What changed your mind? The video, mostly. Nobody bothers being that bad at something for someone they're not serious about. Bad effort is somehow more convincing than smooth effort, if that makes any sense. It makes perfect sense. I'm going to be badly trying at this for a long time, probably. Fair warning. I'm counting on it. The kiss that followed started careful. The specific careful of two people who just navigated their first real test and weren't entirely sure yet what the other side of it looked like. Then it went warm, her hand finding the front of my jacket and pulling me half a step closer, deliberate in a way that erased any lingering uncertainty about where we actually stood. And then, for one long, unhurried moment, it went past warm entirely, into something that made the coffee shop parking lot feel like exactly the right place for a complicated week to finally resolve itself properly. We broke apart to the sound of a car alarm going off 2 rows over, entirely unbothered by either of us, both of us laughing at the thoroughly unglamorous interruption. Very romantic, she said. Truly sets the mood, that thing. I'll arrange for better ambiance next time, I promise. Don't. I think I'd miss the chaos if it suddenly started going smoothly. We took it slower after that. More deliberate. Both of us more careful about naming things directly, instead of letting assumptions build up quietly underneath the relationship the way the bet had. I kept up the ASL classes, graduated eventually from the beginner course to intermediate. Got ustedes less clumsy, though Mara still corrected my grammar, with the specific relentless enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching more than she'd ever admit outright. About 4 months in, at a small gathering of her closest friends, most of them deaf, most of them communicating in ASL faster and more fluidly than I could yet follow, Mara pulled me aside during a lull in the conversation. I want to give you something, she signed, slow enough for me to catch every word. A name sign. It's a deaf culture thing, a sign that represents you specifically, usually given by someone in the community who knows you well enough to capture something true about who you are. You don't pick your own. It has to come from someone else. What's mine? She showed me, a specific hand shape drawn near the temple, the letter C moving in a small deliberate arc. It references the way you tilt your head when you're really listening. Not performing listening, actually doing it. I noticed it the first week, and I've been saving it, waiting until it felt like the right time to give it to you properly. Priya, watching from a few feet away, signed something enthusiastic that made the rest of the room applaud lightly, and I understood, even without catching every word, that I'd just crossed some meaningful threshold in front of witnesses, who took the moment seriously. I felt something in my chest go tight and warm simultaneously, understanding, even without fully grasping every cultural nuance, that I'd just been given something significant. A small, permanent mark of belonging in a community that had, until 4 months earlier, been entirely outside my experience. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. That's sort of the point of a name sign. Just use it. Let people know you by it. A year later, we moved in together, and Renee, of all people, ended up giving a genuinely moving toast at the small engagement party that followed a few months after that. An actual apology, in front of both our families, for the careless framing of a bet that had almost cost us both something real before it had a chance to become real at all. I want it on the record, Renee said, glass raised, that I've never been happier to be spectacularly, thoroughly wrong about something. Mara, sitting beside me, signed something quick and sharp in Renee's direction that made half the deaf guests in the room laugh loudly enough that the hearing half had to ask for a translation, which Mara provided, still laughing, refusing to fully soften the joke in translation. I got to see Mara handle real pressure at work, about 8 months into our relationship, when I tagged along to a company event she'd been dreading for weeks. A product launch presentation she was leading in front of a room of executives, most of whom had never worked directly with a deaf colleague before. I watched her walk into that room, with an interpreter positioned exactly where she'd requested, watched her field aggressive, skeptical questions from a director who clearly hadn't expected the technical depth of her answers, watched her handle one particularly clumsy moment, a senior VP who tried to talk directly to her interpreter instead of her, with a level of practiced, weary patience that told me this wasn't new territory for her, just an old exhausting pattern she'd learned to navigate without losing her composure. You handled that VP a lot better than I would have, I told her afterward, once the room had cleared. I've had 29 years of practice handling exactly that VP, in 100 different bodies. You get efficient at it eventually, doesn't mean it stops being tiring. She rubbed her eyes, the specific exhaustion of performing competence and patience, simultaneously for 2 hours straight. The actual presentation went well though. Did you catch the part where I demonstrated the new authentication flow? I caught all of it. You were genuinely impressive up there, VP nonsense aside. I know, she signed deadpan, the sign for no, delivered with theatrical confidence that made me laugh out loud in the middle of a mostly empty conference room. Priya still checks in with me occasionally, an unofficial mentor of sorts in the slow, ongoing project of actually becoming fluent instead of just conversational, correcting my grammar over text with the same patient bluntness she'd shown that first game night. You're getting better, she told me recently, after I'd fumbled through an entire voicemail in sign for Mara's birthday, recorded and sent the way I'd once sent that first clumsy apology video. Slowly, painfully, but better. High praise from you. Don't get used to it. I have a reputation for honesty to maintain. The sign for funny still comes up more than any other in our house, deployed liberally at my continued grammatical mistakes, at Renee's ongoing guilt-driven overcompensation. She'd taken her own beginner ASL class after the engagement party, showing up to family dinners now with steadily improving, if still occasionally backwards, sentence structure of her own, at the specific ordinary chaos of building a life with someone whose first language isn't quite your first language yet, but is getting steadily closer every single day. I think back sometimes to that doorway. 4 minutes into a date, I almost derailed entirely with my own panicked uncertainty. And I'm grateful, in a way I don't think I fully appreciated at the time, that Mara gave me the grace of a do-over instead of writing the whole evening off as another exhausting encounter with someone who didn't know how to seize her properly. I've since learned that grace isn't owed to anyone, that plenty of people in her position would have been entirely justified walking out that door without a second thought. She stayed anyway, taught me a sign for funny over dessert, and somehow, despite the worst possible start, turned a careless bet into the realest thing either of us has ever built. Renee still brings up the bet occasionally, usually at holidays, usually with the specific mortified affection of someone who knows she'll never fully live it down. Best worst idea I ever had, she says, and Mara every time signs the word for funny in her direction, unwilling, even now, to let either of us forget exactly how close the whole thing came to never happening at all. What would you have juiced if a joke someone else was betting on turned into the realest thing you'd ever built? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.